Amen.
Box.
Yes, what? I just stopped them.
Like foaming at the mouth. Yeah.
And it worked.
We're getting started. We're getting started. All right. Good morning, everybody. We're in Genesis 1. I've decided to call this series Encountering Our Creator at like 11:30 last night. I say that, but it was also the title of the VBS series I was going to do back at Gospel Light when I was writing those lessons.
Yeah.
And I never got to use it because we switched to regular Bible Press lessons. Yeah. So I thought, well, waste not, want not, right?
That's right.
So Encountering Our Creator, we're on day 2 of creation, and it's going to be a little bit of explaining. So on day 2, it says in verse 6 of Genesis chapter 1, God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day." So what we see described is, at this point, the earth is just a ball of water. That's all it is. It's a ball of water spinning on its axis. And what we see on day 2 is a separation of one layer of water, of that ball of water, from a layer of water suspended above it, separating the waters from the waters. But what was this water above the earth? Well, some creation scientists theorize that when the Holy Spirit moved upon the face of the waters, like we talked about last week, it created, amongst other things, and it gets very scientific. There's a whole like research paper on the subject. But for our purposes this morning, we're going to talk about one of the things it created was a magnetic canopy infused with concentrated hydrogen, which is going to be important later, and some of the things that we explain. And on day 2, that hydrogen was bonded with the water molecules to form into a crystalline lattice. So basically, there's a thin, solid, crystal-like structure that was thus created as a canopy over the watery earth. Right? So you have a crystal-like structure suspended about, theorized to be about 300 feet above the earth. Have I lost anybody yet? A little bit? Okay.
I'm ruminating.
Okay.
The water bubble above the earth, but
Right. So you guys who maybe have heard me teach this in junior church heard me talk about the water sack over the earth, right? Okay. It wasn't actually a water sack. That's the phrase I use to make it easy for kids to understand. What I believe in doing is teaching in layers, right? So you get it on the basic level in junior church, and as you grow through the church, you get more and more layers of the complex stories, right? So it wasn't actually a water sack. What it was a like crystal-like structure about 300 feet above the earth that covered the entire planet in this crystal. It's going to do a lot of things, and we're fixing to talk about it, actually. It's incredible. So the resulting crystalline canopy would have resulted in what's called a greenhouse effect. And it would do many things for the earth. As a matter of fact, that research paper I mentioned to you before has like several pages of things that it would do. That, again, we're not going to get into all of them this morning. But for our purposes in the storytelling of Genesis, and for you to understand what the world was like before our sins messed it up, we're going to talk about a few things. 3 things specifically, which we'll mention today. First of all, the canopy would be dominated with a magenta hue. So the sky is blue right now. We know that to be the case because that's the color that travels the farthest, is blue, and that's why the sky is blue. So if there's a crystalline structure, it functions as kind of like a prism, and it changes the color of the sky. So instead of it being blue like we know it, it would be more of a magenta color hitting the earth. So imagine going outside, and instead of a blue sky, it's magenta. How like beautiful and amazing that would be. It would, and it would have an effect on the growth and life of things on the earth. Right. And we're fixing to come into that. But also imagine like sunsets. If the sky is a magenta hue and there's this crystalline structure changing the way that we see the sky, the sunsets, some scientists theorize, might have been not just near the projection of where the sun sets. It would have covered the entire sky, and it would have been like a rainbow. It would have been all these different colors because the crystalline structure would have functioned sort of like a prism. Right. Well, it wouldn't be a literal prism, but it would affect the colors that we see like a prism does. So, yeah.
that would be like a perfect.
Well, yeah, and again, it's not literal crystal. What it is, it's these hydrogen atoms infusing with the water to sort of crystallize and form this special kind of structure. So it does. Yeah, and I think that's why the colors change when we look through this crystalline structure, and it's magenta, and the sunset looks different. It's because it is altering the sunlight as we see it. Another effect of that, I don't have this written down, but I'll go ahead and tell you, is that it functions as like a magnification of the stars. So the light from the stars is more, it's more vibrant when you look through this, and the light pollution affects the stars a lot less. So kind of like how you can see the moon in the sky, like sometimes when it's in the sky, like right now, it would be the same way with some of the stars. So you'd be able to see stars in the middle of the day like you can the moon right now. Yeah, actually, they would be their own unique color. So, like sometimes if you, I don't know how many of you guys amateur astronomers in here, but if you look like when Mars is in view and you go out at night, it kind of has a reddish hue to it. If you look at it like through a telescope or something close enough, it would just be red when you looked at it in this way. They would have their own true colors reflected. Yeah, and just like it is now, exactly. So when different stars are in the sky during different times of year, they would reflect their own unique colors and so forth as they came to the earth. This is the world we had originally. This is the world that God created. We really did. We really did mess it up. I mean, what we have is still beautiful, but it's nothing compared to what we did have. Yeah, kind of, yeah. Okay, so the spectrum of magenta light produced by the energizing of hydrogen has a significant effect on plants, inducing more than 30% additional growth for various different kinds of plants. So because the light hitting them is different, it helps them grow better. You may have seen like in some greenhouses or in some plants, like where they have specific rooms for plants, they have different colored lights helping them to grow. That's basically what was happening over the whole earth, was that this crystalline structure was creating a color that was helping the plants to grow 30% larger than they normally would. And you can imagine like there would be a lot less hunger in the world. If there's 30% more growth in all the plants, there's 30% more food being grown. There's so much more productivity. Uh, well, they didn't have the problem we have today because there's 7 billion people on the earth today. And but it's taken us that long to get there. But they quite possible that they had more food than they had need for, certainly. But as we're looking at it right now in Genesis 1, we haven't even gotten to Genesis 2, they don't do anything to grow food. It was growing by itself, right? Right. Plus, and we haven't gotten to any of this yet, but when the animals come around, they need that food as well. And there's a whole ecosystem that works so perfectly that we're going to see. But yeah, the food grew itself and needed no farmers and needed no ranchers. And it was an amazing thing. So the canopy, the third thing I wanted to talk about, would filter out most of the harmful UV rays. And that's, do what? Yeah, no sunburns. Also, like, we probably wouldn't get cancer from being out in the sun too much like you can now. That'd be another effect. So it would eliminate those harmful UV rays, which would make humans much healthier and have fewer illnesses. Because a lot of times it's the sun, and sometimes get like when babies come home and they have jaundice. The solution to that is put them in sunlight. So healthier sunlight would be a lot better for humans on a large scale. Right. Right. Well, what I'm saying, like, we didn't lose this crystalline structure till Noah's flood, right? So we had this with sin for a while before we lost this. So, and as a matter of fact, I'm fixing to come into that because you do see people living 700 to 900 years old in the Bible, even after sin has entered the world. And that's one of the reasons people have a hard time believing the Bible. People only live to be, at best, now it's better than it was, 20, 30 years ago, 80, 90 years old. Dick Van Dyke is knocking on 100, I think. I mean, still able to tap dance better than me. So, but they were living 700 to 900 years old, and can't imagine how that's feasible in the world we live in. but it's because it wasn't the world that we live in.
I don't know.
There was not seasons yet. No. So that changed, I believe some things changed after the Garden of Eden, and then some things changed after the flood. And what things changed during what times, I think we'll get into. Seasons were a much bigger deal after the flood, right? And yeah, certain parts of the world after the flood and everything happened became the Ice Age. Like especially the northern continents and so forth dealt with that Ice Age kind of a thing. And so you do see a lot more of that after the flood than you do before. But before, it was a utopia. And actually, I think today we're going to get into that a little bit. So we'll I know it's so, there's so much to get into and it's so exciting to talk about. I do that too. I have to actually stop myself. Yeah. I have to stop myself from jumping ahead sometimes because I'm like, I'm trying to build to a point, but I want to talk about it now. So no, I do get that. Yeah. No, I know how it is. I do. And I love the questions. I don't want to discourage questions. So I love that too. But yeah. Right. But also think about this. There's a higher ratio of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at this time as well. It's more heavier infused in this sort of greenhouse effect with this crystalline canopy. Like all the they're contained within this crystalline structure. It's not dissipating into the atmosphere, right? So there's more oxygen in the air. Now imagine when it's humid outside, there's too much moisture in the air, there's less oxygen, and it's a little bit more difficult to breathe. They'll even put out notices for like the weather in the mornings, and they'll let you know, if you, have asthma or you're using an inhaler, be sure to take precautions because there's less oxygen and it's a little harder to breathe when you get out. Imagine the opposite. Right? It's easier to breathe. There's more oxygen. Like my grandmother probably wouldn't need to carry those tanks around. There'd be so much oxygen in the air that nobody would struggle to breathe. And I am going to jump the gun a little bit here because it follows this point. One of the big mysteries of the fossil record has been when you look at the T-Rex, and the way that particular dinosaur was put together, one of the questions they have is, how did it breathe? Because according to its skeletal structure, the place where its lungs would have been, their lungs would have been very, very small compared to the vastness of that dinosaur. So they say, how did it breathe? Well, if you've got an atmosphere that's more saturated with oxygen than you have right now, that would explain how they could survive with such smaller lungs. Oh yeah. And we're gonna kind of talk about dinosaurs when we get closer to the flood and when we get into the animals being created. But there's a whole this idea of, well, why aren't there dinosaurs in the Bible? There are dinosaurs in the Bible, and we're gonna get to it. Mentioned specifically. Let me see where this is at. Actually, I've got it written down in here, but I'm trying to figure out exactly where I've got it written down at. No, you're good. Again, I know I am too. I love talking about all this stuff. Yeah. So I think it's when we start to talk about the grass and so forth, but I'm pretty sure it's in. I don't want to miss it. I don't want it to have missed it in my notes and not talk about it. But yes, I am planning on getting to that today as well. So the effects of this canopy have been, okay, we're talking about it now. Would have been recreated and tested by the Creation Evidence Museum. Anybody ever been to the Creation Evidence Museum? Yeah. Okay, the Creation Evidence Museum specifically, they have what they call a hyperbaric biosphere. Oh, wow. Yeah. Absolutely check that thing out. If, sometimes it's not always open when you go. It wasn't open when we were there, but they're running an experiment right now called the hyperbaric biosphere. And what it is they're recreating the effects of sort of the pressure and the oxygen saturation, carbon dioxide saturation of what it would have been like in the pre-flood world with that crystalline structure, and seeing the effect that it has mostly on plants. I heard Dr. Ball talk about the effects it had on like a snake that was growing in there. I've heard rumors of a house cat. Now, I don't know that that's a fact, but I've heard rumors the house cat grew to be about the size, when it was fully grown from a kitten, it grew to be about the size of a bobcat. That's the rumor that I've heard. The snake, that what they did is they studied the venom of the snake, and they took it before, like a regular snake of that species and that size and so forth, and took its venom and studied it. And then they took the venom of the snake that had grown in that biosphere, and it was twice as potent as the venom that was in the biosphere as opposed to the ones that wasn't. So there is definitely a growth. The plants do grow about 30% larger in that biosphere. So the science is there for this. And it's an incredible thing. But I do want to mention real quick that when you talk about to a secular scientist about this, and their argument against this greenhouse effect and the crystalline canopy is going to be to point to Venus. Now, if you know much about Venus, you'll know that it has a greenhouse effect as well. But what it's got is what's called a runaway greenhouse effect. And it's very different than what we're talking about this morning. But what they'll say is that greenhouse effect kept building to the point where it evaporated all the oceans on the planet of Venus, and the temperature reaches 863 degrees Fahrenheit on the planet Venus. And that is a runaway greenhouse effect, which means that heat continues to build inside of that pressure. That's not what we're talking about for Genesis 1 and the pre-flood world. What we're talking about is a sustained temperature that does not continue to build on itself and grow hotter. It stays at that temperature all the time, right? So not so much with the seasons. Do what? Yeah, well, exactly. One of those Earths. I want one of those Earths too, yeah. Right, well, once you have it evaporating the waters and it destroys the atmosphere and it gets that hot, there's nothing left, even in the atmosphere. Yeah, and yeah. And not that we could go there and figure it out anyways, because it's 800 something degrees and everything would melt by the time we got to it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing to me that people can see that perfect system at work and then think, wow, how lucky it just happened to land that way, from a giant explosion in space. To me, that takes more faith than believing in the Bible. Okay, and real quick before we move on, I want to make this last point that doesn't matter to anything, but I've just got to mention when we read through this and it talks about the firmament and the firmament dividing the waters from the waters, and God called the firmament heaven. Okay, the firmament is not the water sac. Okay, that's not the crystalline structure we're talking about. That's not the firmament. And I say that because there's a lot of really intelligent scientists calling this structure the firmament. When you read through the Bible, the firmament is the sky that makes up the space between earth and this structure. It's just what we call the sky. Reread it real quick. It says in verse 8, do what? Yeah. In verse 8 it says God called the firmament heaven. He's not calling the crystalline structure heaven. He's calling that space. Sky is one heaven. The space is another heaven. And then that place where God dwells primarily is the third heaven. Right. So there's actually a couple verses that talk about the third heaven. And I just wanted to point that out because every time I hear somebody call that structure or whatever they think it is, the firmament, I just cringe really hard. So that all being said, that's day 2. And we're going to talk about day 3 now this morning. It says in verse 9, God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he Seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and the herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the third day. So you see once again there in verse 13, it's separating the evening and the morning, those two day and night cycles being mentioned again. But it says, let the dry land appear on day 3. And so on day 3, the dry land and all its layered elements appeared all the way down to the earth's core. Right? So before this, the earth was just one big ball of water spinning on its axis, had the different kinds of energy introduced to the earth by the Holy Spirit moving upon the face of the waters. You have this canopy that's created, and it's created all of these effects, but there's no land yet. It's just still just a big ball of water. And then on day 3, you have the earth's core and all the layers coming out created on day 3. That's why it says, let the waters be gathered together into one place. So all the water is now on the surface of this planet. It's now got a core and crust and all the things that make a planet. And those things became or were manifested by the will of God, and a great supercontinent was outlined on the planet's surface. So, and this is true. I think we saw that they were showing this at there was a field trip one of the kids went to, and what you could do is they had this big, huge table, and you could take all the continents, and what you were meant to do was to try to piece all the continents together like a big puzzle, and they do fit together pretty well. And you have this supercontinent, and this supercontinent is called by scientists Pangaea. And Pangaea fits as perfectly within Scripture as it does in any less faith-based theories about where the world comes from. Pangaea was how God created the world. And it's amazing because it means that originally we weren't all divided up. We weren't all separated out. There weren't different continents. You didn't have your Europeans, and then you didn't have your North Americans, and then you had your Africans, and you had your Asians. We weren't all separated out like that. We were all from the same one supercontinent. And we were all one people. We weren't, even after the days of Adam and Eve and men began to multiply on the earth, it was one people. You didn't have different races of people, right? We have today, as it is, we have African Americans, and we have Asian Americans, we have Hispanic Americans, we have all these different ethnicities that make up our culture, and that's a wonderful thing. But when those things begin to cause division and cause anger and hate, it's important for us to remember that really we're all just Edenic Americans, right? We all come from the same place if you go back far enough. We all come from the Garden of Eden. We all come from Adam, no matter what color your skin is. We're all related. You can take it even a step further than that and talk about Noah. Him and his family were the last ones left alive. We all come from Noah as well. We all, really, when it comes right down to it, are all part of the same race, the human race. And this talk of division and separation and differences is, when it spreads hate and so forth like that, is really more harm than it does good, and it's just not true. Isn't it silly how we base our theories and our ideas about human behavior and human culture off of what we see with our eyes? They've got different skin color than me, so let's talk about how different we are than that. Well, we should be intelligent enough to know that color doesn't always necessarily mean that everything about them is different from me. We were all one people originally. That's how God created us. All one supercontinent, all the people living in the same place, all one in unity. Yes. Yeah, we will, not for a while, but we will get there. I will tell you this before, because the Tower of Babel will be the last thing we talk about before the series is over. So when looking at the world that God originally created and how it changed into the world we have today, it'll be Genesis 1 through 11 will be what we talk about. Because in Genesis, the bottom of chapter 11, it begins to talk about the genealogy leading to Abraham. And it begins his story in chapter 11. Some people start in chapter 12. You're missing a lot of important notes about his life if you start in chapter 12. Abraham starts at the end of chapter 11, talks about his father and his brothers and his time in Ur of the Chaldees and so forth. All of that in the same chapter as the Tower of Babel. So it's a very important chapter right there. And when we get to it, that'll wrap everything up nice and neatly in a nice little bow. So it says also, let the earth bring forth grass. So it says three things specifically when we look at it. It said grass, it said herb yielding seeds after his kind, and it said the tree yielding fruit. So when the Bible was written by Moses, way, way back, it's the first bit of written history in all of human history. They're the books of Moses, right? Handed down from generation to generation. And I don't understand people's argument about this is what they say about the Bible. People who don't believe the Bible, you probably heard this. They say, well, it's old Hebrew campfire stories that they used to tell around the fire. And that, they just got written down and carried down from one generation to the next. And they just kept writing it down until we have the Bible today. Wouldn't that be amazing? I mean, how many other stories from like 8,000 years ago do you know about? That would be amazing in and of itself. But also, we discovered not that long ago these things you may have heard of called the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are dated accurately to that time period. And they re-encount perfectly what had been handed down for thousands of years with very little change. So that proves that they're more than just campfire stories that have been handed down. They're the oldest bit of history that we have. There would be if they found anything that wasn't faith-based buried in the ground and discovered the way that those Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, it would not be rejected the way that these are. This is as much evidence as anything that's ever been found. And so we find in here it talking about these three specific types of plants. And because this story comes before scientists decided how to categorize plants into different categories, we have all of plant life categorized into these three categories. It says grass, but it doesn't just mean grass like we know it. It doesn't just mean like St. Augustine and whatever kind of. It's talking about weeds. It's talking about wildflowers. All of these things are grass as far as how the Bible breaks it down. The herb yielding seed after his kind is all these different kinds of it bears fruit, or it bears you grow herbs in an herb garden, that sort of thing, and you can use it to cook, or some of them have medicinal properties. And they grow differently, sometimes in bushes and sometimes in small clumps. And however they grow, all of those kinds of bush and fruits and so forth, that is the herb yielding seed after his kind. And then you have trees. And everything else that grows kind of stalky like that, you might not call a tree in our most modern scientific day, but that is what the Bible breaks it down into. All of plant life broken down into these three categories. And all of plant life was created here on day 3. And we talked about this a little bit. It's amazing to me that all these plants are created in such a way as to interact with the world around them, to continue to spread seeds and grow in the world for as long as the earth is old. That these plants have created within them the ability to create more plants exactly like them, and that the earth has a system that runs itself in such a way where you will always have the fruit of that plant, as it will spread its seed just in nature, right? That it will tend to itself sort of in our natural world. Exactly. It speaks of intelligent design. If we happened, the statistics of the odds, if you could calculate the odds of you know, a bit of matter that was, shot out as a result of the Big Bang Theory. You could calculate the odds of it landing in just the perfect Goldilocks zone to a sun. If you could calculate the odds of it creating the perfect atmosphere so as to sustain life, then calculate the odds of the life on that planet manifesting itself in such a way so as to continue to sustain life for evidently billions of years, what the odds of that would be instead of it something going wrong and it dying off like we evidently see happen on all these other planets. We were talking about Venus a second ago and the oceans drying up and so forth. The luck of the odds of that not happening. And then the odds of plant life manifesting itself in such a way that it continues itself forward. That those are long odds. That it would grow in such a way so as it has seeds that produce more plants and that it creates in itself a way to spread those seeds that those plants continue to grow. The odds of that would be astronomical. I'm telling you folks, it would take more faith to believe in that than it would to believe in God. It just makes more sense that there's a master creator who designed all of this to work perfectly. They can look for as long, as hard as they want to. They're not going to find intelligent life out there. And they're baffled every time they look a little further and still don't find anything. It blows their minds. And I'm like, folks, I see a pattern. Isn't that science? Right? Like I'm reading the evidence. There is no evidence. Right? This isn't, some Marvel movie. This isn't, invaders from Mars. There's no intelligent life out there. You go far enough, I guess, if you reach heaven, find some pretty intelligent life up there. But beyond that, I mean, it's amazing that this is the only planet that sustains life. What are the odds of that? I mean, we see the odds of it because there's not another planet like it out there. Astronomical. God, also, I want to put this thought in front of you so it'll manifest into a further lesson when we go to talk about it, that God did not create seeds. Right? Think about that. God didn't create seeds, did he? God created fully grown, fully developed plants. That he didn't have to wait for them to grow in their own time. God created fully matured plants capable of immediately producing the seeds and fruit that would later be needed. By the way, can anybody name the one fruit whose seeds are on the outside of it? I know you know. Nope. Strawberry. And how amazing is that? That as the fruit is eaten and nature takes its course, that those seeds then begin to grow more plants. But they didn't start as seeds. God didn't create seeds. He didn't plant seeds in the ground and wait for them to grow. He created fully matured, fully developed seeds. How long do you suppose it takes a tree to grow into a full, you plant that seed and it grows into a full-grown tree? Does anybody know?
30 years,
20, 30 years, something like that. Yeah. You think God waited 20, 30 years before moving on to the next phase of creation? No. He's created fully matured, So that tree, ask you this question, maybe it'll break your brain a little bit. How old was that tree on day 3 of creation? Okay. 20, 30 years? 200-300 years old? There's the right answer. It's a day old. Yeah, because it was the first day it ever existed. But if you were to cut that tree down and measure the rings of that tree and see how old it was, it would tell you that tree was 20, 30 years old, hundreds of years old, however old God decided to, in levels of maturity, create that tree. And I want you to think about that as we move on to our further and further into our series on these days of creation and encountering our Creator. Yeah, absolutely.
When Armageddon?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay. And it's just us and God again, and we've got New Jerusalem. Will we get that back?
I don't think it'll be like it was for the millennial reign. But after that, you might remember from our series in that the Bible says that there will be a new heaven and a new earth. And it talks a little bit about the new earth there toward the end of the book of Revelation, and it talks about the tree of life. It's there, and it seems like the way that it's written in Revelation, the way I interpret it, is almost like it's that sort of utopian, green everywhere, perfect earth kind of atmosphere again. But I don't know that it'll be exactly like it was the first time. Right. I think it'll be good, very, very good, like the first time. But I think what you see a lot of times in the Bible is you see a perfect loop. Right. So I think in Genesis, in origins and creations, you see God blooming this idea of perfection. Right. And I think you see it as just sort of blooming in Genesis. And the world I'm describing is just the beginning, just the basic. And when you get to the book of Revelation, he recreates a new earth. I think you see the ideas you see in Genesis, but we will see it to its greatest possible exponential concept. Yeah, the greatest version of creation that could possibly be. What was, miniature in the Old Testament, we'll see explode into its fullness in the end of times. So very possible. I don't think it'll be like it was. In my opinion, I think it'll be better. I don't think the sky is going to be magenta. I think it's going to be some sort of a crystal, like a literal prism, just all the time. Beautiful sky, all the colors, all the time. Right. And I did want to mention this about plant life. What we see in the plants that God created is a sort of perfection in that plant. Like when you go to eat a strawberry, I don't know how she'd always do it, but Mrs. Smith from Gospel Light, when she would get fruit, she would bring fruit to some of these fellowships and stuff. It was the best tasting fruit I think I've ever had. Yeah. And she would be store-bought fruit, but she would just make sure it was fresh, and she knew how to pick the best fruit. It was always so good. And so different than like when I go to Walmart and buy a thing of strawberries. It just doesn't taste as good. I didn't know that. But also think about, like, we have a peach tree back here. And during the spring or during the summer, as those peaches are starting to grow, we're mowing back there or working back there or whatever. I always love to just mow right up next to that peach tree and grab a peach right off the tree. Yeah. I could tell you the peaches that I buy at the store do not taste nearly as good as one right off of that tree. There's a plum tree next to my grandmother's house next door. Those plums, if you catch them at just the right time, you got to beat the birds to them. But those plums are the best plums you will ever eat, fresh off the tree. Now, what you have in the fruit that we have today is called genetic deterioration. Okay. Now, what they'll teach you in science class in public school is that as time progresses, things evolve to adapt to the world around them to an even greater and greater, basically X-Men. Right? That's mutation. We're continuing to evolve and adapt to even better and better. What you actually see in something that has a mutation in it is genetic deterioration. Everything, whether it has a mutation or not, is a genetic deterioration. And genetics growing worse and worse with time, not better and better. That's why we have to replace a lot of the fruits that we no longer have with a alternate genetic version of them. Remember, avocados used to not be so popular as they are today. Now that I'm a millennial, every morning I have to eat avocado toast. It's part of the millennial creed, right? It's just part of it. Where did avocados become so popular? They didn't used to taste that good because they're now genetically altered. We lost avocados and had to recreate them in a science lab. Right? You would not believe the fruits that have been genetically recreated. Exactly. Have you ever seen a real banana? A real banana has seeds. You will never eat a banana again. When you Google banana and look at the picture, you'll go, oh, okay. No more banana splits from Brahms for me.
I know I talked to you about the
Yeah.
I have to prove it.
Yeah, no, I believe you.
That's what the watermelon is.
And again, another genetically altered fruit because we lost it.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, that was more of a melon-looking kind of
So
fruit.
a lot of it.
Yeah.
That's a watermelon.
So a lot
Yeah.
of it now is, from what I've read and everything, it's to produce more food for.
Yeah.
Right.
Consumption.
Because we've lost so much of it, there's not enough of it to go around anymore. And we have to genetically alter these things. And the genetically altered things are better than the fruit that's left, as you can see, like the watermelon, the bananas, the avocados. And why is that? It's because the fruit on the earth is slowly genetically deteriorating worse. And now imagine day one that apple was created. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I'm telling you right now, they had fruit in that original world that no longer exists. We have animals that no longer exist. We have plants that no longer exist as well. And I'm telling you right now, the fruit that they had in that day, you wouldn't need steak. You wouldn't miss it. There'd be fruit that doesn't always taste sweet, doesn't always taste savory. I mean, you think I couldn't live off of fruits and vegetables. I couldn't be a vegetarian. I couldn't. You could back then. There might have been a fruit that tasted like steak. They got their protein somehow, right? So this is the world that we had originally. And then we messed it up. How do we mess it up? Because of sin. Right. Right. But we take, but what did Adam do? He took a bite of a piece of fruit. And that cost us perfection, right? But how many of us have done worse than that just this week? Right? So that is the resulting effect of this. That's the end of our lesson today. We are actually out of time. So we will be back starting at 11 o'clock to start the Sunday morning service.